How do you find a history that's been deliberately erased, completely wiped from the record? It's a huge question. And often, the answer isn't just about finding new artifacts, but about changing the way we look for them. Today, we're going to dig into this powerful idea that to recover a lost past, we have to start by reweaving the very stories we tell. And we'll do that by looking at the buried history of Cherokee Two Spirits. So, first thing we have to get our heads around is this idea from Miami scholar Malaya Powell. She says that all history, all scholarship, it's all storytelling. It's not just a dry list of facts and dates. Nope. It's an active imagination of weaving bits of information together to tell a story about how the world works. This concept, it's the key to everything that follows. And this is brilliant. The Cherokee language itself has this idea built right in. The word for a storyteller is gagoga, but it can also be translated as he or she is lying. Now, that doesn't mean it's about deception. Not at all. It's this incredible recognition that stories have the power to stretch our imagination, to build worlds that go way beyond just the basic facts. Storytelling is a world-building art. Okay, so if history is a story, what happens when one story comes along and just violently steamrolls another? We've got to understand that when colonists arrived, it wasn't just a simple clash of cultures. It was an active, brutal project of erasure, especially when it came to anything that didn't fit their rigid ideas about gender and sexuality. This map from 1709 is a perfect example of one kind of erasure. See, maps like this were basically weapons of empire. They drew new lines, slapped on new names, and on paper, they just wiped Indigenous people right off their own land. It's a clean, almost sterile way of claiming ownership, right? But the reality on the ground was anything but clean. This engraving from 1594, it's horrifying, but it shows the brutal truth. You have the explorer Balboa ordering his dogs to literally tear apart Indigenous people because they didn't conform to European gender norms. This wasn't just random violence. Scholar Deborah Miranda calls it gendercide, the deliberate destruction of gender diversity. So here's the point. This history wasn't just forgotten, it was hunted. It was destroyed on purpose. So that brings us back to the big question. How on earth do you find a history that's been so violently scrubbed from the record? How do you read the silence? Well, the answer is to shift our whole perspective, to stop looking through a colonial lens and start using Cherokee concepts as our guide. First, we have to understand the idea of do yuk TV. This is a central Cherokee value, and it's all about maintaining balance, justice, and order in the world. The universe is seen as this delicate web of relationships, and the whole point is to keep everything in harmony. This worldview is the foundation for everything we're about to look at. Now, inside that balanced world, some things just don't fit into neat little boxes. They're called asegi, which means strange or an anomaly. A great example is a bat. Is it a mammal or a bird? It's in between. In Cherokee thinking, these in-between things aren't mistakes. They are incredibly powerful. They hold the potential to create or to destroy. And these Asegi spaces are exactly where we can find the histories of people who lived outside the rigid colonial boxes. Okay, let's see this in action. Take the story of the Lady of Qwo-Li. The Spanish De Soto expedition runs into her in 1540, and she completely breaks their brains. She's a woman, but she has all this power. They just can't compute it. So they kidnap her. But she doesn't just give up. She escapes, takes her valuables, and, this is the key part, she takes a whole multicultural group with her, including enslaved men from North Africa and Cuba. Her story, her power, this community she builds on the run, it's a perfect Asegi story. It was completely illegible and totally threatening to the Spanish. Looking for these Asegi spaces isn't just a theoretical exercise. It leads to actual, tangible discoveries. Discoveries that totally challenge the colonial story and, as one writer puts it, help to re-beautify a memory that was deliberately made ugly. Let's look at the proof. So you have colonists like James Adair in the 1700s, and he sees these really deep, committed relationships between people of the same sex among the Cherokee. But he doesn't have the cultural software to understand it. The best he can do is compare it to the Bible story of David and Jonathan, calling it a stable and tender friendship. He could see something profound was there, but he could only describe it through his own very limited Christian lens. But we now know it was so much more than that. We know from records that there was actually a formal ceremony to recognize a perpetual friendship between two men or two women. One person trying to describe it wrote that the bond embraced much more than just friendship or peace. So this wasn't some hidden thing. It was a recognized, celebrated part of the community. And the evidence gets even more direct when you look at the material culture. I mean, just look at these. These are Cherokee pipes from the 18th century. They are explicitly and unapologetically erotic. Art like this completely blows up the colonial narrative that Indigenous people were either prudes or savages. Instead, what we see is a culture with a healthy, vibrant, and artistic expression of sexuality. So why aren't these kinds of objects more well known? Well, because they were destroyed. This one account tells of a colonial farmer who plows up a sculpture with a large phallus, takes one look at it, and immediately smashes it because he decided it was too indecent to be preserved. And just like that, a piece of history is gone. That single act tells you everything you need to know about the censorship that made this recovery work so necessary. So, what's the big deal? Why does digging up this history actually matter right now? Well, this is not just an academic argument about the past. This is about healing the present and trying to build a better future. This quote from Corey Tabor, a contemporary Cherokee Two-Spirit person, really brings it all home. The whole point of reweaving these stories is to make good on that promise, that there is room for everybody at the fire. It's about making sure that Two-Spirit and queer Indigenous people today can see themselves in their own history, not as some kind of mistake, but as a crucial, powerful part of their community. When you get right down to it, this work of restoring is a profound act of decolonization. It's a direct challenge to the violence that tried to erase these truths in the first place. It's about remembering a more inclusive past so that we can build what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called a beloved community, a world where justice and love create a place for everyone. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Maybe creating something new, telling a new story, is really just about waking up the old ones that we thought were gone for good. And it makes you ask, right? What parts of our own history have been silenced? What stories do we need to start reweaving today?